Hello, this is Coach John. Welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be digging into stress. What is it? Where does it come from? Why do we get stressed out? And how do we deal with it? What do we do? So, I like to define stress as anything internal or external that requires energy from us in order to deal with, in order to reestablish homeostasis. And energy in a biological system is the capacity to maintain order. So when we encounter a stress, we sacrifice some of our capacity, some of our potential to maintain order in order to realize that order, in order to reestablish homeostasis in the body. And where does it come from? It's called LIFE, life. Stress is all around us. More so nowadays than there used to be, but it's coming at us from all angles. I like to break it down into these 6 categories of stress so that we have a better understanding of the basic buckets that are really contributing to our overall stress level. So the principle underlying stress is that all sources of stress summate in the body. You've got 6 different sinks that are contributing to one reservoir that is you. So when we're working with our overall stress levels, we can reduce stress in other places when we need to deal with stress, higher levels of stress in others. But we'll get into how to deal with it later on in the video. So in order to understand stress, I like to break it down into these different categories, 2 different sides of the coin of stress. So eustress and distress, a lot of people like to use those as things that are constructive or destructive. I look at them as more black and white to categorize things, in like drugs and pollution. These things are not natural, they are a distress, just flat out. There's really, I'd have a hard time being convinced that they could be a positive stressor. So then the source of stress can be either acute or chronic, and it can be a low dose or a high dose. Of course, there's a spectrum in there and all of that, but for the sake of simplicity, acute and chronic, low and high dose are the ways that we're going to be thinking about and talking about stress today. And all of those things determine whether a stressor is constructive or destructive. So for example, an acute high-dose stressor, such as an automobile accident. I have a broken spinous process in my neck. That was a very quick, high dose of stress. It's an external force on the body. Or a low chronic stress. This is things like nutritional stress. This is not eating right. 20, 30 years, these things don't show up. We're under stress the whole time, but it's sub-perception. It's below our perception that we are under stress because other things might be more pressing to us and we don't realize that what we're eating is stressing us out. And that's what's contributing to things like diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, these things that show up later in life. Cancer takes like 10 or more years to develop. But the thing is, you start the process of developing it somewhere, and you turn on that low dose of stress and you never turn it off. You leave it on. That's chronic stress. When you leave that stressor on, eventually it consumes all of the energy that we have to deal with that specific stressor. So suddenly you no longer have the capacity to maintain order in your body. You develop something like cancer, you develop something like Parkinson's, these longer diseases that show up later on in our years. They really started cooking in our 20s and 30s. So we want to keep these in mind when we're talking about stress, when we're thinking about stress and how we're going to work with it. So where does it come from? We'll get into each different category and just some examples that I have, talk a little bit about how we can deal with them and elaborate a little bit more on what I mean about them. So exercise, such a easy one to understand. You go to the gym, you spend some energy, lifting some weights, lifting things that are heavier than your body, and you go home, you rest, you build big muscles, you lose some body fat, you look better, and that's kind of pretty cut and dry. One that's not so cut and dry or talked about is postural imbalance and postural balance. So when your posture is really stacked, you almost like float in your body. But when you're in a, let's use an example, a common forward head with a kyphosis, forward head, rounded shoulders, that's going to interrupt a lot of nutrient and blood flow. So for example, here in the shoulder joint, there are some major arteries, veins, lymphatic, and neurological vessels, tubes that are running here. And so when we roll forward, we're increasing the tension here. And think about when you squeeze on a hose, you reduce the water that comes out the other side. Or when you put a kink in it, even worse, you completely interrupt flow. And that's when you go from, let's say arthritis in your elbow, because you have a reduced flow through here, nutrients in and waste out. You reduce the flow there. You start to develop inflammation that shows up as your carpal tunnel, your arthritis, or if you completely block the flow, if you have a severe blockage, then you develop necrosis and the tissue just straight up dies. You're no longer dealing with an itis, an inflammation condition. Tissue's just starting to die because it's not getting any nutrients. And so postural imbalance can be one of these stressors that are below your perception, but are something that really need to be considered overall in terms of reducing your total level of stress. Accidents, that's really just to give an example of a physical stressor that's not, this would be chronic and low dose stress. Exercise can be acute and high dose, it can be acute and low dose. We can do another video on working with the stressor that is exercise and how to get positive results given your overall stress profile. But accidents are just something that's chronic and high dose and something that we need to be aware of. A lot of people that I work with have been in accidents, and so it's not an issue of dealing with chronic stressors, although they will help in recovering from an accident. So chemical stressors, the biggest one is breathing. Breathing can be a huge source of stress reduction, or it can be a huge source of stress. If you're not breathing from your diaphragm and instead breathing from your neck by lifting your rib cage up in order to create the space for your lungs to expand with air, that's going to tighten everything here, reducing blood flow and lymphatic and nerve flow to and from your head. That's going to contribute to headaches and the like, but it's also going to tighten the muscles that bring your head forward. And when your head comes forward, your head suddenly weighs more here on the neck. And so breathing is also controlling, the pH balance of your blood. Having a properly balanced pH of your blood is critical for the health of your tissues. Breathing also stimulates the vagus nerve. It's responsible for the motility of your guts. There's so much that proper breathing can help with. It can help reduce stress across the board. More and more research is coming out that 10 minutes of 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out breathing, box breathing, I think they called it. For me, that's a normal breath pattern. That's 6 breaths per minute. That is a healthy individual. It's showing such profound benefits for reducing stress and mental clarity and all these amazing things. Just basic diaphragmatic breathing. So hormonal balance can contribute to stress in the form of mental emotional stress a lot of times. So a lot of these things can bleed into each other. As I said, they all summate in body. They also talk between the syncs. So for example, exercise can have a positive effect on our mental emotional stress. When we get a workout, we get endorphins and a lot of feel-good chemicals and get a sweat up, and some people love the feeling of a good sweat. That comes back to our perceived level of stress. So we're gonna have a distressing thing it's not outright bad, but it's somewhat destructive. Exercise breaks down tissue, but it has a positive effect on our mental. And sometimes, we can increase the physical stress, but we can reduce the mental emotional so much more. And that's a net positive. That is a constructive stressor. But hormonal balance can also contribute to mental emotional in the form of sex hormones. A lot of people are infertile nowadays. A lot of people are struggling to have children, and they really want to have children. And that is going to weigh on them 24/7. Why am I unable to reproduce? I'll do a whole other video on that, getting into why reproduction is such an issue nowadays, but just know that it comes back to hormonal balance. What are you eating? How are you living? Basic stuff is what's going to determine whether you can or cannot reproduce. Drugs and pollution. So drugs, my favorite one is caffeine. Not the hard stuff like heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine or let's keep it legal, Ritalin for the kids. Caffeine is going to upset your hormonal balance in a big way. Caffeine stimulates the production of cortisol and adrenaline. You have three primary hormones in your body: cortisol, adrenaline, and insulin. A lot of times these coffees are coming with sugar, maple syrup sometimes, honey, if you like honey in your coffee, but you're messing with two, possibly all three of the three necessary hormones for life. You can throw out testosterone, estrogen, follicle stimulating hormone, whatever. You will not die without testosterone in your body. You will not die immediately, I guess, without these other hormones. You will die without insulin. You will die without cortisol. You will die without adrenaline. And coffee really messes with those three hormones and can have profound negative changes in the long term. That's something that it's a low dose, or a lot of times people are doing higher and higher doses because their tolerance to the stressor of caffeine is going up. And we get a little uplifting effect from the coffee, but really it's just stealing energy from the future. And so drugs are something that we've really got to be careful with. Pollution is a stressor that I don't believe that we can really increase tolerance to. This is what's in our water, what's on our food, what's in our air. People living in New York City are breathing some amalgam of brake dust, biodiesel fumes, and biodiesel is a wonderful source of glyphosate. It's a wonderful source of glyphosate. And then all the cigarette smoke and everything, the particleized roads and all of the chemicals that are just floating around. It's not that great airflow. You're just breathing that stuff in. And your body has to do something with it. It takes energy to clean that stuff up and get it out. What's in our water? More and more pesticides, chlorine, chloramines, chlorates, metals of all kinds, arsenic, lead, mercury. Go to ewg.org, go to their tap water database. If you are on municipal water, you need to know what is in your water. Design a filter that will get rid of all of that nasty crap out of your water. It's going to make such a profound difference in your life. What's on the food? We'll get into that with organics. But this stuff is showing up in our water as well. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. Hydration is a huge consideration when it comes to chemical stress. A 1% dehydration of the body produces profound neurological changes. Not for the better either. Making sure that you're getting good, clean water and lots of it. The solution to pollution is dilution. Getting a good amount of good, clean water and making sure that you're getting hydrated, structuring your water and all that good stuff. That's going to help every single one of these. You need water to run every single cell in your body. Not drinking water is like, it's worse than not brushing your teeth or I don't know, wiping your butt after you go poo. I don't know how to say, like, that is the most basic thing that we all need to be doing. Electromagnetic stressors, these are becoming more and more prevalent as the topic of conversation. A lot of people are concerned about Wi-Fi and 5G and the acceleration of the amount of electromagnetic stress that we're under. But I really like to bring awareness to other forms, sunlight and moonlight. You know, it's a wonderful thing to go out and sunbathe for an hour. You come back inside, hydrate, you feel better. It's like, oh, you just soak in all that energy. But 10 hours out in a field with no shirt on, harvesting, green beans and garlic and all these other things, that's going to take you for a ride. It's going to beat you up. So that would be, chronic stress that is a too long time frame of sunlight exposure. But you get a tan and you will increase your tolerance to it. Moonlight is also something that a lot of people don't realize is incredibly stressful. It stresses plants out and it stresses us out. If you don't have blackout blinds on your window, that moonlight coming through your window at night is going to disrupt your sleep. And that's going to disrupt your ability to deal with all these other forms of stress. Wi-Fi, there's been entire books written about Wi-Fi. I mean, Dr. Mercola, EMF'd, Nick Pino's work, Dr. Robert O. Becker's work. There's so many different ways that you can really dig into what's going on with Wi-Fi. As far as I know, it's the production of DNA damaging free radicals, superoxide and peroxynitrate. These things are really, really not good, and they're produced endogenously in response to Wi-Fi. There's other stuff with permeability of the blood-brain barrier, but that's across the board. That's not just Wi-Fi, that's cell phones, that's the 4G, 3G. I mean, when Dr. Becker did his work, this was the 70s and 80s. They're using those giant, ham radios and things that we don't use and a lot of people on this earth would not recognize. He found that the rabbits that they were testing their devices on were dying of parasites in their brain. And these parasites were always on board, but it's when they were exposed to these electromagnetic frequencies that they became susceptible to these parasites and died. So there's a lot going on with Wi-Fi and electronics in the house, cell phones. But another thing is transformers. Not only, out on the power lines, but also in your house. This is on your fridge, your washer, your dryer, your freezer, the big appliances in your house. They're putting out what's called dirty electricity. And Dr. Mercola talked about how this dirty electricity, it's the Wi-Fi is putting out a single frequency, but the dirty electricity is this amalgam of multiple frequencies, and it produces these endogenous free radicals at a much, much higher rate, and it's so much more dangerous. So we've really got to take good care of dealing with the harmful electromagnetic stressors in our home through things like biogeometry or Aries Tech. I'm not saying throw out your cell phone and go live in the woods. Like, you're not going to escape the satellites. You're not going to escape this other stuff. Grounding. Get outside, get your bare feet on the earth and get grounded. Biogeometry has been shown to have wonderful positive benefits as far as mitigating and transforming and harmonizing electromagnetic stress. What I'm looking for is not an elimination of this technology, but harmonizing it with biological systems so that we can evolve and continue to use this beautiful stuff and make a more beautiful world for everybody. Weather is a form of electromagnetic stress in my book. A lot of people feel sad on a rainy day. There's the loss of the sunlight, there's the loss of the vibrant colors that come with the daylight and the sunlight, and it just kind of puts you in a mood. You want to sit inside, grab a book, drink a cup of tea. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if it rains for a week, suddenly you're inside and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to get outside. Oh, I'm so tired of being hemmed up inside. It's terrible. And so, on the other side of things, a month-long drought, that's going to be mental, emotional, that's going to be, nutritional stress. Your plants are going to start dying in your garden. That's going to be all sorts of different types of stress that lead into each other. Light therapies, I'm not going to talk much about, but it's something to consider. A lot of people are using red light therapy, green light therapy, lasers of different kinds for, providing some energy to the system, and, it's helpful for mitochondria, other stuff like that. I don't know much about it, but it's something, if you're interested in working with stress, something you can look into. Mental, emotional, this can be some of the most important stress that we talk about today. Stinking thinking. Stinking thinking is possibly the root of all problems in a human body. Dr. Larry Dossey, MD, in his book, The Extraordinary Power of Ordinary Things, The Extraordinary Healing Power of Ordinary Things, he told the story of a patient that came into his hospital. He got a preliminary diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is really not a great cancer to get. And this guy, right away, preliminary diagnosis, right away, he just like puts on a stank face and sets his jaw. He's just like, man. And Dr. Dossey's like, hey, we're gonna run some more tests. We're gonna verify that it's pancreatic cancer, and we're gonna come up with a treatment plan. We're gonna fix this. And this patient was just like, no, it's pancreatic cancer, and nobody survives pancreatic cancer. And he documents the decline of this patient over the following hours. Was refusing food, wasn't drinking water, just totally set himself on giving up. He was dead within 24 hours. Didn't get a second opinion, just like convinced himself that he was going to die because he had pancreatic cancer, and nobody survives pancreatic cancer. There's other similar stories where people's mind convinces them that they're going to die and they end up dying. But on the less severe side of things, stinking thinking often just colors our day and makes everything stressful. Deepak Chopra cited research showing that we think about 68,000 thoughts a day. I think it works out to like a new thought every second, something like that. But 90% of those thoughts were found to be negative in nature. That's 90% of your day thinking about, I hate my job, I hate my car, I hate what I'm eating for lunch, or I don't make enough money, I'm not good enough, nobody thinks I'm beautiful. All of these negative thoughts they're just adding up. And when we're thinking negatively, that is a major source of stress. It requires a lot more energy from us. You look at the people that are happy about their lives, they're bouncing off the wall, they're like, hey, good morning, good to see you, woo! They're just celebrating life. They're probably not eating too much. They're probably eating less than someone who's under a significant amount of stress, because their energy is not being used on dealing with their stinking thinking. They're filling up, from a celebration of life. Goal setting is another form of mental emotional stress. Goal setting, it is stressful. You think, all right, I'm gonna rebuild that car's engine, and it takes energy. You got to think about what are the tools that I need, what are the parts that I need, what kind of I need something to lift the car out of the block, and it's going to take me like 4 weeks to do that, and how am I going to get the time? And so figuring all that stuff out takes energy, but it gives us something to look forward to. It gives us some purpose, some drive, and when we have that internal drive, that fills us up with energy, and we can handle the stress of our life going forward, because we have that thing that we're looking forward to. If there's an old saying, if you have a why, you can bear any how. And so when you have that why you're doing something, you have a goal, you can bear anyhow to get to that goal. And it reduces your perceived stress. So another thing with the mental emotional realm is relationships. And I'm not just talking about your relationship with your boss, with your mom or your dad or your husband or your wife, your kids, your dog. I'm also talking about your relationships with exercise, your relationships with food, your relationship with yourself. You know, these relationships all can be sources of energy, or they can be things that we give energy to. And everything requires energy, but you know, love is a boomerang, and we want to get back at least what we're throwing in to the relationship. So, you know, a lot of negative stress from a relationship comes from addiction. And addiction is a repeated behavior that is not producing the results that you want. So you've got these exercise bunnies. Yeah, I got to do my 2-hour spin class in the morning, and then after I get off work, I'm going to go 20 minutes on the treadmill, and I'm going to pump some iron for 2 hours. And you talk to them, and oh yeah, well my shoulder, my elbow, and my knee, but you know I just love it, so I'm just going to keep going. And they're just running themselves ragged because they're addicted to the exercise. They don't have, you know, something bigger that the exercise is serving. And so the exercise itself becomes the thing that is the driving force. They're addicted to it for the positive benefits, you know, the runner's high or the endorphins of lifting heavy weights. But over time, if it's chronically too much, we're not resting, then stuff leads to breakdown. Same thing with food addictions. You know, too much of any one food is going to contribute to intolerance. That's how the body says, hey, take a break. You've had broccoli every day for the last 30 days. You start having an immune response to it. It forces you to take a break. And you can, of course, not listen to it. A lot of people have intolerances to eggs and dairy, and gluten intolerance is common. And that's a whole separate thing, you know, what's on the food. But addiction can really, really, really be an underlying driving factor of a health problem. You know, not just to exercise or nutrition, but also addiction to a thought pattern or a belief about yourself. And so that comes into your perception and your values around any one of these things. And your perceived level of stress can depend on your sensitivity. So before I get into nutrition, someone who's really, really sensitive to EMF, they're gonna have headaches from looking at a screen. You know, they need a special type of screen. They've got to have all wired connections. And you walk in their house and you're like, Jim, you're a crazy person. Why does your screen look like that? Can't you just get a Mac? And he's like, no, it gives me headaches. And you're kind of like, what are you talking about? Well, he's one of these, like 10% of people are extremely sensitive to man-made electromagnetic frequencies. Sensitivity to gluten or eggs or you know, going so far as allergy. You know, someone who has a genetic allergy to beef is going to be extremely sensitive. No bovine dairy, you know, no beef, anything in there is going to provoke a serious response. So now I'm going to get into nutritional stress, and the topic of nutrition is discussed so heavily across so many realms, and you know, everybody's got their opinion. They've got their ism that they love to go with, and I just don't find that productive. I think we need to understand the principles behind nutrition and develop our own plan about how we eat that's right for us. You know, if you really find that you operate best as a carnivore, wonderful. If you find you operate best as a vegan, I'd love to see it. Good luck. You know, paleo, keto, all these other things, they're kind of ignoring the principles of nutrition. And the principles that I love to work with and teach about are that nutrition basically breaks down into structure and stressor. And that, for the most part, is animals and plants. A food that is high in stressor is going to be a plant food. Let's say your broccoli, it's got, alkaloids, terpenes, phenols, and defense compounds or sulfur containing compounds, all these things that cause some small damage to the body and require energy from us to heal, but then we improve in response. They call it a hormetic stressor when it's spoken about nutritionally. Whereas your beef or your chicken or your pork or your fish or ostrich, if you're into it, that's more your foods that are providing structure. These are the things that are very easy for our body to take in and utilize in our body. And so when we convert some of these foods into energy for ourselves, it takes some energy. There's always some exchange. And so the closer something is to us, the easier it is for us to use it. So that's why, there's no pure structure food or no pure stressor food. Perhaps, something like cane sugar would be pure stressor, but it does provide some calories. So, but there is some stress that comes with, especially chronic consumption of animal proteins. The body of the animal breaks down into, again, I like just keeping it simple with two categories. You have the mineral body and the vitamin body of the animal. The muscle meats are much, much higher in minerals and much, much lower in what we call vitamins. Whereas you look at a nutritional almanac, the organs are so much higher in vitamins, vitamin A, B vitamins across the board, folate, all of these vitamins exist in the organs, and the minerals, are largely missing from the organs. And so you can have a stressor if you're chronically consuming muscle meats with no organs, or if you're chronically consuming muscle meats without any bones, you upset the glycine methionine balance. And so we want to be eating some variety so that we don't end up making a structured food into a stressor. And so when we work with this, when we work with nutritional stress, we want to keep in mind the other stressors that are going on in our life. For example, a woman, let's say a 29-year-old lawyer, just made partner, she's got a big case, she's under a lot of mental emotional stress thanks to her job. But she is also at day 22 out of 28 in her cycle. She's about to menstruate. She is undergoing PMS, and the later in her cycle she goes, the more stress she produces because her body's preparing to shed the uterine lining, and that's a lot of nutrition that's leaving the body. And so the later a woman goes in her cycle, she's going to require more structure and less stressor. In a cold environment, you're going to be looking for more structure. That's why Eskimos eat mostly meat. Also because plants don't grow in ice, but they're having to regulate their temperature so closely, and it's not done through sweat and hydration. It's done through, kicking up the internal furnace, and that requires a lot of fuel. And so working with nutritional stress, you can look at your other stress across the board and develop a baseline based on your metabolic type of, at this point in my cycle, I need a bit more protein. I need a little bit more flesh foods, or, it's the middle of summer, I'm on vacation. I don't need to eat 24 ounces of steak at dinner. I can go for chicken and a salad, less structure, a little bit more stressor, because you're good across those other realms. So when we're making decisions around our food, we want to think about organics and processed crap. Now, I brought up organics in regards to pollution and hydration before. Organic food is something that I value very, very much, not only for myself, but also for the planet, because these chemicals, these synthetic herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, are extremely detrimental to the mother that feeds us, but they're also extremely stressful to us. You know, you are what you eat. And so when we harm the web of life externally, we harm ourselves because we end up drinking it or eating it on our foods. And so I find that a lot of people do better when eating organically food or organically sourced foods because they're not being exposed to the atrazine, the glyphosate, the 2,4-D, and on down the line. These things are all over our food system, and we really need them to not be. I have a whole other series on finding high quality local food, and I get into a little bit more about these chemicals and finding farmers that are not using them. A large problem for a large amount of people in America is processed crap. What is processed crap? It's the large center shelves in the middle of the grocery store. You know, I tend to stick to that outer ring of meat and produce, sometimes dairy if I'm feeling it, but processed crap takes up the most square footage in our grocery stores, and it's the most detrimental stuff to our health. Dr. Francis Pottinger did a study on cats showing that raw foods produced healthy cats over generations, and food that was cooked produced cats that were degenerating over generations. That's not even getting into processing of it. That's just the enzyme content. And these foods that are on the shelves are enzymatically dead. But carbohydrates that are refined with additives and preservatives are even more so detrimental because these carbohydrates so often are in forms that are extremely challenging for us to deal with from a blood sugar handling perspective. They're refined into forms that we would not find in nature. So our body's like, hold on, what is that? How do I deal with it? Can I use it? All right, I might be able to use it. Let's go ahead. But then it's got all these additives. You know, the FDA GRAS list is some 3,000 chemicals that are generally regarded as safe, but have never really had any testing. And you know, that includes coloring, which a lot of colors are banned in the EU, but are allowed in our food here for some reason. And then preservatives. If it's stable on a shelf, it's probably mostly stable in your gut. I mean, bacteria does the digesting here, and bacteria is doing the digesting there. So how are we getting nutrition if the same type of, being, bacteria, is what's doing the digesting? So preservatives really lock away a lot of the nutrition from us. And with processed crap, you have a food product. I'm not going to call it food. It's a product that requires more energy from us to process than it gives us in return. Sure, it has calories and it's got these synthetic vitamins and minerals in it, but it's not giving us enzymes, and our body has to do a lot of work to convert those synthetics into forms that our body can use. And so, in a situation where, nutritionally speaking, that Marie Callender's Salisbury steak is giving you less energy than it is taking you to run it from mouth to anus. And so this stuff really shouldn't be on your plate, shouldn't be in your home if you're looking to create health. And, so even leaving aside organics, just going from processed crap to a whole food diet, sure, it's got the chemicals on it, but that food is a live food. It's much more likely that you're going to reduce the chemical stress from the processed crap and also get enzymes and the alkaloids, phenols, terpenes, and then the compounds that create structure in your food. Fasting and dieting, I'm just going to touch on briefly. Fasting is a tissue breakdown. It requires energy to do it. Of course, you're relying on internal energy to run your body because you're not bringing in external energy in order to keep the furnace going. Fasting can get you into trouble if you're in already a low energy state. Someone who is severely obese I don't recommend that fasting is the first thing that they do, because sure, they have a lot of weight, they have a lot of calories on them, but they don't have a lot of the structure. They don't have a lot of the things that are required to process the body fat and the things that are trapped in the body fat. Body fat is an organ that stores toxins away from your vital organs, from your liver, your pancreas, your kidneys, your lungs. All of those things are protected by your body fat. But when you fast, you force your body into a situation where it's like, all right, I need energy to run all these processes, and you're not putting any in the mouth, so I'm going to start taking a little bit from these fat cells, and eventually start to liberate those chemicals that are tied up in body fat. And you can cause scarring in the liver if you liberate too much junk too quickly. It's been seen. Dieting is not always a negative, although a lot of the ways that people do dieting is negative. Cutting calories from a whole food source is a terrible idea. A calorie fundamentally is a unit of energy. It's not the only energy that's in food. There's enzymes and all these other chemicals that provide us energy, but a calorie is a unit of the energetic carrying capacity of that food. And when you cut calories, you're reducing your energy. And when you reduce your energy, you lower your capacity to maintain order. You make yourself more susceptible to all these other types of stress. And so if you're in a situation where you're dealing with a health problem already, or you have a health problem and you're overweight and you're trying to lose the weight, dieting's not a great option. Bring in as much nutrition, high quality structure, and a little bit of stressor, and that will produce much, much better results, of course, with your metabolic type and all of that stuff. But there are some cases where dieting is appropriate. For example, if someone has a really virulent fungal infection, then they need to do a near ketogenic diet and starve out that fungus. And if they have a parasite infection, same thing. Those mycotoxins are really, really detrimental to the body. And so that's a situation where doing a hard diet is recommended. It might not be necessary, but it's definitely recommended. And so, having some discernment with this really can allow you to make the most of the nutritional run. Finally, I'm not going to go too much into hot and cold, thermal stressors. Obviously, just thinking about it from an acute, chronic, low and high dose perspective, if you're chronically cold, you're going to go hypothermic. If you're chronically hot, you're going to sweat, have heat stroke, that sort of thing. So a lot of people are using them in an acute way to promote some really profound health benefits, but you've just got to keep in mind all these other stressors, and when you're working with the sauna or the ice. If you have someone with an itis, inflammation is a heating up of the body. I'm not so sure that you want to make your first stop the sauna. The same thing with an osis. An osis is a cooling down of the body. It's a hardening of the tissues. I'm not sure that you really want to make the ice your first stop. But now we're going to get into utilizing stress to modulate our response, to modulate our sensitivity and our perception of stress. So we can utilize hot and cold, breathing stress, exercise to modulate our perception of mental emotional stress. Really is the one that we're working with there. So the chronic low dose mental emotional stress, and I can't decide if I want to hire 3 new employees. That's really going to hurt the bottom line. But I'm at 60 hours a week. That's constant stress. I mean, the workload itself, and then always thinking about it, always stressing over it. That's taken a lot of energy from us. And so we can give our body a form of stress that is more pressing to its immediate survival, and reduce the perception of the mental emotional. And so we go to the sauna and we say, hey, it's 205 degrees in here. I don't need to think about, beating the quarter and making sure that my profits are on target, or I'm not so sure that I need to think about, is the dog sick? No. We've got to focus all of our energy on making sure that I don't have a heat stroke, that I, cool down the body properly. And then you start getting the messages, hey, get out, it's pretty hot. And, that reduces your perception of the mental emotional and can reduce the perception of physical stress. It can help with pain and all those things. The cold can do the same thing. Exercise can do the same thing. A lot of people report positive mental emotional changes in response to exercise. And it's not just from the chemicals, it's also that they give their body a more pressing stressor than what they're thinking about. Breathing is a fantastic way of doing this. I love doing this when I do the ice. I go into the ice, but then I stop breathing. I go under, and suddenly the ice doesn't seem so bad, because it might take me 10, 15 minutes, who knows how long, to go hyperthermic and start losing toes and stuff like that. But 5 minutes under the water and I'm toast. I'm done. So I modulate my response to the cold, and I allow myself more of the adrenaline. I allow myself more of the cold and heat shock proteins by making my breathing the more pressing stressor. And that's kind of a way to play in with it and have some fun, and also increase our tolerance. So that's working with perception and tolerance to modulate our response to stress. And so when we're working with our stress levels, there's really, these two things. We can just reduce the stress, or we can increase our tolerance. And sometimes increasing tolerance comes with a reduction of stress, and sometimes it comes with altering our perceptions. So, for example, with food stress, reducing your intolerance or increasing your tolerance to food is actually not exposing yourself and building up a tolerance like you would build up your biceps. You expose yourself to, let's say, squat instead. 225-pound squat, and you take some repetitions, you rest, and then you come back the next time. Your tolerance has increased. Your tolerance to the external load across your shoulders is now higher, and you can tolerate more repetitions or more sets or more weight. So increasing your tolerance is a way to work with these things. But I don't really know that there's a way to increase your tolerance to postural imbalance. I don't know about increasing tolerance to drugs or pollution or Wi-Fi. These things that these are man-made. They're synthetic. Same thing with Wi-Fi and transformers. They're man-made. They're synthetic. Increasing tolerance to sunlight, you get a tan. Some people don't tan, and I'm sorry, but that you are increasing your tolerance. Or if you want to reduce your stress from sunlight, you can not expose yourself to as much. You can reduce it. And so, remember I brought up how all of these things summate in the body, and we can use that to our advantage. We can say, all right, I've got a really, really big goal. I'm going to rebuild this car in 2 weeks. And that's a huge goal for me. It's this huge undertaking. I'm not going to go to the gym when I'm doing that. I'm going to use work in exercises that bring me more energy than they take for me to do. Through the principle of piezoelectricity, we can move our body slowly with our breath and bring energy in at a higher rate than we spend it to move our body through space against gravity. It's a similar thing to food. We can eat foods that bring more energy in than they take from us to run from mouth to anus, because muscular contraction to move through all the tubes and convert the chemicals to something we can use. That takes energy. But ideally, the food and the exercise will leave us with more energy than when we started. And then we can deal with chemical, electromagnetic, mental, emotional, thermal stressors better because we're reducing the stress involved with this. We're bringing more energy in. And so with that deadline, I'm going to work, postural exercises so that I'm balanced and I have more longevity during my days in rebuilding the car. I'm gonna cut out the ice cream. I'm gonna cut out the bread because that's gonna disrupt my abdominal wall. It's gonna send my blood sugar for a ride. I'm gonna be yawning, and I really need to be able to focus on what I'm doing and make sure I'm not dropping screws or bolts or grabbing the wrong wrenches or just moving slow because I really, really want to do that. So I'm going to reduce my nutritional stress. I'm going to wear a nice shirt, but I'm going to keep the fan on because it's hot, and I'm not going to spend a ton of energy on maintaining my temperature. I'm going to make the external environment work with me to meet that big goal. And so I'm going to reduce stress here, I'm going to reduce stress here, I'm going to reduce physical stress, and then these ones, as far as that goal, we could talk about that, but not really that pressing. You get the principle. Anyway, that just about sums it up. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I hope that this helps elucidate some of your concerns about stress and gives you a couple ideas about how you can work with yourself a little bit better and make your life less stressful, more energetic and playful. Thanks for watching.